Good morning. Welcome to Carpo's channel. How's everyone doing today? I'm going to make this in my car because it's, well, a comfortable spot to make a video and somewhat quiet. I wasn't sure exactly how to tackle this. Mother Nature is kicking some ass out there, you know, but it's easy to get wrapped up in our personal lives, especially when, let's say, you're stuck in the storm in Houston. The last thing you're going to be worrying about is a storm somewhere else. I guess I'll start off by saying, you know, the Houston situation is horrible, and it's not just about the flooding. It's not just about the storm. It's about all of the lack of regulations, zoning laws, and chemical plants, oil facilities, refineries, power plants. All of these things are affected by weather. And since they all sit on the coast, the long-term effects have yet to be seen. But it seems like right after this happens, of course, within a few days after this, the wildfires here got to the point where it was affecting my area. So I'm inundated with smoke for 3 days. There's ash falling on everything, and it just really got me thinking about how, if you're in your own personal situation, it can seem like the world's coming to an end. And to be sure, all of the conspiracy nuts are out there, you know, talking about the world ending, the end of days. It's always the same thing. And I guess what the worst part about it is that when you go out looking for real information, the only people who talk about disasters tend to be the ones who want to talk about, see, I was right, or we've been telling you this would happen, you know, October surprise, all these things are coming. This isn't about that. It's not about the conspiracies or conspiracy people. It's about the fact that there's a lot of shit going on right now. And I want to start off with the solar activity because I haven't mentioned this yet. I wanted to make a video about this the other day, but I wanted to see kind of first what would happen before I went on saying, oh my god, there was the biggest solar flare in decades, and it's going to create aurora all the way down to Oregon and Ohio. That's what people were saying, and there's possibility. But, you know, there's one thing about these, if you're not aware, if you don't follow the sun, then you probably wouldn't be familiar with the EU, which is the electric universe theory. And that basically postulates that there's an interconnected field between not just planets and our star, but all stars, that each galaxy has its own interaction, even with other galaxies, that everything is electrically connected. It's my personal opinion that to think that that's unlikely or not possible is completely delusional. You know, the idea, and what I'm saying is that I don't believe that everyone with an electric universe theory is correct 100% of the time, but I do believe there's a correlation between solar activity and not just storms on Earth or earthquakes, because that's a huge issue, but between our personal psyche, the way we feel and the way we act. A good example is my mom was talking about how her tinnitus was really bad. She has really bad tinnitus the last day or two, and she doesn't usually have it. She might have a light ringing, but it got really bad. And I said maybe it was a solar flare, you know. And it was funny because when I got on to Suspicious Observer this morning to see the update on the solar flare and the CME impact, I found out that, like, one of the first comments, somebody was talking about their tinnitus and saying, can solar flares, you know, increase health problems? Now, there are two directly opposing lines of thought when it comes to these things. There are scientists who believe that the sun has absolutely no effect on our health, other than maybe atmospheric disturbances, which maybe will affect us through storms secondhand, but no direct connection. Our cells produce, you know, ATP production is basically a transfer of what electrons. We are electric beings. We are light beings. We are electric beings. But all that goes beyond spiritual mumbo jumbo. It's about the fact that our bodies connect electrically. This is why electroshock therapy was used for so long, and then it was ridiculed by science. But guess what? Now it's coming back into the mainstream. And it's a matter of how you apply electricity. But we do the same thing to jumpstart you. Think about it. When your heart goes out, what do? boom, they jolt you with electricity to bring you back. So using this basic knowledge about how the bodies are affected by electricity, there's no doubt to think that we wouldn't be affected by magnetism, electromagnetism, if you will. And when there's a major solar event, it can strengthen storms, and the idea is that perhaps it can actually increase earthquakes. Let's just say the sunspot earthquake connection is something that's very highly disputed in the community of, but the thing that blows my mind is that Ben Davidson, who does the Suspicious Observer channel, no, he's not right 100% of the time. Nobody's right 100% of the time. If you can even remotely, though, predict where earthquakes may happen within a realm, and you can directly correlate those earthquakes to disturbances in the magnetosphere of the Earth, I'll be blatantly honest, I do not understand all the science behind it, but I know what sunspots are. I understand what a CME is, coronal mass ejection, as compared to just a solar flare. A flare is just a bright flash, but a CME is heading directly to Earth. We had one hit the other day. I believe it was the last night into this morning, or maybe it was the previous night, but the other one's supposed to hit now, within, today, or tomorrow, or yesterday. The idea is that it's very hard to gauge how fast these are traveling through space, and there were 3 events that happened. One was an M class, but I think the final one was an X 9.3, which is the biggest solar flare we've had Earth-facing in a long time. And the reason why this is important is because it's affecting our psyche and our health. There were a bunch of studies done in Russia from, I think, the 1942 all the way up to 1997 about solar events and how they correlated to deaths, suicides, and found that there was a direct correlation between people acting, let's just say, acting crazy. I can't remember exactly how it was defined, but, visits to hospitals increase with the full moon has always been one of those things where people are like, oh, well, that's just because there's more light. People are out. It's not about speculation, and I'm not trying to say for a fact that a full moon causes people to freak out or a solar flare causes people to have these problems, but it seems to be very obvious to anyone who looks into it. The problem lies is when people twist this into and morph it into some conspiracy or try to understand more than they do. I consider Ben Davidson to be the foremost expert on these things, as far as the people that I watch and listen to. And there are several other guys on YouTube, that post information. I'm not going to name any of them, but I've watched them all. Back in the day, I used to watch Dutch Sense. I don't know if he's still doing his thing, but he was really an asshole to me and a jerk to people who ask questions. And a lot of these, no offense, if that's just my take. And a lot of people, if you say, well, how can you be so sure about this? They'll give you, responses like, you're just a dumbass, fuck you. And it's like, that's the type of community that I try to avoid. But I wanted to say that even on Suspicious Observer's channel, it's the same thing. There will still be people asking questions, but Ben usually responds to them with saying, look, use your brain. It's hard to deal with people who want to say, well, man-made global warming, or let's say man contributing to climate change is completely not likely to some people. They won't believe it at all. And they'll talk about how CO2 is great for the environment, it's good for the plants, completely ignoring the other factors with phytoplankton and the warming temperatures, methane release. There's so much involved. But I won't even argue that point anymore. It's a matter of they will say that there's no way man can contribute to climate change, but they'll at the same time, the same people will say, oh, that men are creating these storms by using HAARP. If you're not familiar with that one, it's the High Altitude Atmospheric Research Project, which began in Alaska. And they've built a few facilities around the world, but they can basically send high-powered waves, microwaves, into the atmosphere. And if they wanted, they could probably blow a hole through the ionosphere. And I believe they have had some issues with that. But what they've... the theory goes that HAARP can bounce it off the ionosphere and hit the ground and match the Schumann resonance or frequency, if you will, and create earthquakes. Anything is possible. But the thing is, these earthquakes are predicted more by the people who follow the sun than people who just say, well, a quake's going to happen here, or this is going to happen because, it's after the fact that people blame the government, they blame conspiracies, they blame whatever's going on. Anything except the fact that nature is one hell of a bitch. She kicks some ass. She knows what she's doing. But at the same time, people want to attribute it to the wrath of God or the devil or, whatever it might be. And it's really hard to escape that. It always goes to religion when there's a bunch of stuff going on. So there was the flood in Houston. There was the solar flare. There was all the fires that are just ravaging the state. Still here, we have smoke. It went from 3,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 acres. Then it joined up to a 32,000 acre inferno that just destroyed a whole chunk of the Eagle Creek area. But that's renewal to me. I see it as, as long as no one's hurt, that's just how life is. Nature just renews. But the one I haven't mentioned yet, getting in, moving through the apocalypses of today, I wanted to get the solar flare thing out of the way to say, if you feel awkward, if you feel weird, if you feel down, if you just are not yourself, the sun may be to blame. And some people believe that when these energy waves hit the ionosphere of the Earth, or when they hit the atmosphere, when they hit the magnetosphere, if you will, that they may not directly change humans from that effect, but rather from changing the Schumann frequency or the Schumann resonance of the Earth, which is, I believe, 7.2 or 7.3 hertz. It's the vibration of the Earth. It's the voice of the Earth. It's a combination of all the lightning strikes throughout the planet reverberating through the planet and all the activity that's happening. If this Schumann frequency is changed even slightly, it can affect us as humans. And this isn't getting into some floaty bullshit psycho-spiritual crap. These are things that I'm a hardcore skeptic when it comes to everything, because it's not to disprove anything. It's because I want to make sure that if I believe something is true, that it's useful information to me and that I can actually observe it in my own life. And so when it comes to being affected by the weather, absolutely. Affected by the moon, sometimes I'm just up really late, I can't get to sleep, and I just feel strange, and I wonder, is it a full moon? And then I look it up and find out it's a full moon that night. We can't use the light of the moon as an example of why that happens, because it'll be a cloudy night. It doesn't even have to be, a clear night. I don't even have to be outside or know that the moon is full. There are some things that are just strange, not quite understood, and that I find fascinating. These are the true mysteries of life, And that's why I mentioned the conspiracy side of it is like creating more confusion over things than there needs to be. But the people who are arguing against electric universe theory, a lot of folks think that, I've been told this several times, that they're mainstream scientists and they are shills, they're bought out, that they're paid to lie. I don't believe that. I do not. I don't believe that, millions of scientists around the planet are all tied up in some conspiracy. I do believe in groupthink. I do understand suggestion and the power of suggestion and how they convince themselves that since other theories must be right, that so are theirs. But there is a lot to be said about the scientific discoveries and how they've helped us understand our climate models better, our planet, our sun. And without scientific discoveries, we'd pretty much still be believing that the world is a turtle on a turtle on a turtle on a turtle on a turtle. There are some things that are worth knowing if they help us. So the last thing I'd like to mention, which probably should have been the first thing, is Hurricane Irma. Here we have the most powerful hurricane ever recorded. Now, there have been, this is according, of course, to the models and what we're being told as far as the strength and the duration of the winds at 185 sustained fucking miles an hour. That is insane. You're talking about a nuclear assault coming for Florida. And I don't, they'll talk about it's coming up the left coast, it's coming up the right coast. And my thought the whole time has been, I just get the feeling that this thing is going to go dead center, right up the middle of Florida, and fucking annihilate it. And I sure hope I'm wrong. I don't want to see things destroyed. I mean, if it made a pit stop at Mar-a-Lago, that might be okay. Joke. But really, I don't want to see my nation or my people suffering and destroyed. But if you look at what's going on in Florida right now, it should give you, and no doom and gloom here, but an idea of why being prepared is important. You know, I was a prepper years ago, and when I first started my YouTube channel, I talked a lot about being prepared. I'd show buckets of dried food and the kind of things to get, water things. I have a thing to fill my tub up that's like fits a bathtub that you can fill with water for emergencies. Several different manuals and books, everything from tying knots to knowing how to skin animals to what plants are what. And this is stuff that we take for granted, and especially you and the younger generations. If you're 20, 25, we take the internet for granted and think that'll always be there. You're completely delusional. I mean, if there was an EMP that took out the grid, which is one of the biggest concerns, and there were some grids that went down, some smaller, there were some power outages and radio interruptions with this last impact from the sun. Something like the Carrington event of 1859 could just take us down, and we wouldn't recover for years, if ever. When those systems go down, you can't look on the internet to see where the local food distributors are or where the local water source might be. I mean, you want to be prepared for these things. Have a large propane tank with an outdoor propane grill, big propane tank. Gasoline, all those things are like gold. You don't have to obsess over it, and that's what I'm getting at. It's not about being an obsessed prepper. It's about just being prepared for anything that could happen at any time, and then setting it aside and living your life. Because I meet people today who are still in their prepper phase and still worried about the next catastrophe. And I'm like, look, when you're prepared, once you're physically prepared, you realize that none of that matters. That all that matters is in here. How mentally prepared are you? And so then you develop a mental preparedness and a physical preparedness. And then you put it on the shelf and you say, if something happens, I'm ready. You pay attention to what's going on. But you don't have to follow the disaster predictions every day and see who's dying and what's going on, although it does make a lot of sense to observe what's going on in the world. But Irma, this storm, it's not looking good. I mean, I know a lot of the time these things die out, but if a lot of you have seen what it did to St. Martin, what it's going to do to Cuba. Several islands out there will never be rebuilt. Some of them lost over 90% of their buildings, and it will take, years to rebuild these things. It's not about the destruction to these particular areas like Houston, New Orleans, which I won't even go into, but, rebuilding there, it's just a foolish notion. I understand the desire to stay home, to want to be in your homeland. New Orleans has a history. But the future's going to show it was a big mistake to move back in there and to start rebuilding. As stubborn as people are, the storms are getting worse, and the coastlines are going to get battered more and more. But anyway, as these storms come in and take out these low-lying lands, like in Miami, I guess there's like 20, they said there's like 24 cranes, giant cranes that are worried that might fall into buildings during a storm. They're not meant to withstand anything over 140-mile-an-hour wind. And if that happens, they could crash into buildings, do all kinds of damage. But my thought wasn't about what they could do. My thought was about, what are they doing there? Why does Miami have 24 cranes building giant buildings? Why are we still building in areas which we know in 100 years are going to be underwater? It's because humans are stubborn. Because we want to hold out and think, you may be able to build a wall to keep out immigrants, but you can't build a wall to keep out nature. You can't build a wall along the ocean border and say, well, we're good to go. And the biggest problem of this is going to be the inundation of people moving inland. People from all the coastal communities are going to start migrating slowly into the inner cities, and it's going to lead to the problem like we have here in Portland, where we are becoming, I'm going to make sure the camera's still going. Here in Portland, there's a lot of people who are really irritated with Californians. I heard somebody say that they thrashed their neighbor's car or something because they moved up from California. That is so childish and ridiculous. But it gives kind of an image of how people feel about it was never about immigration, okay? It was never about Mexicans or Asians or blacks or whites. It's about people being comfortable in their area. Generally, if you're cozy in your spot and you're not being disrupted, you don't have any problems with anyone. But the minute people start moving into your city and the resources become harder to get, it becomes an issue. And, you know, we've developed this xenophobia to protect ourselves. We have to become more community-oriented. All the possibilities of things that could have happened in Houston, instead of widespread looting and murder and mayhem and thievery, sure, there's going to be some of that crap. But thousands of people are down there helping, risking their own lives and health, bringing their boats, bringing in water. Of course, in Florida, there are people who are trying to sell cases of water for $50 or $10 a bottle. But they're getting called out on it. People are saying this is bullshit, this is unacceptable. Taking advantage of a disaster situation to make profits is something that people will always do. But they will be shamed by those who are saying, hey, I'm starving, I'll just take that water. What are you going to do about it, you know? We need to help each other. I guess what I'm saying is, as much as there's negativity to be seen, there's more positivity, more people that want to help and do care. And in Florida, what it's showing is the gas stations are running out of gas. They say that I was watching videos of police escorts for tanker trucks, gasoline tankers. So here we have in our own nation right now, police escorts for gas tankers. They had to bypass trucking regulations in, I believe, Alabama and Georgia, so they could clear the way for fuel deliveries from other states to try to keep up with the demand of the drivers running out of gas, because there's 1 million people on the highway driving north, bumper to bumper. And when that festival I went to, I spent, 12, 13 hours trying to get in a 20-mile line. Imagine doing that trying to escape a hurricane, not going to something fun, but trying to get the hell away. I mean, that's got to be the most frustrating thing, to be sitting on the freeway with your whole family in the car, all your possessions, and just hoping you make it out of town in time. But the stores are running out of food. As usual, they run out of plywood. All the Home Depots and everything, and it's like, I'll just say this, I personally would never live in a coastal community, because I've always been anxious, and about like a tsunami or a major hurricane, even here in Oregon, Washington coast, especially there, because a tsunami would be annihilated, and we're way overdue for a major quake on that fault line. So, and then people will say, well, what if nothing ever happens? For the most part, you just live your life in a beautiful area. And I agree with that. But at the same time, say, well, if I had the choice to live in a beautiful area that's not in a flood zone, that's not on a coast, that's better for me. I am a hop, skip, and a jump from a volcano that erupted 30 years ago. Mount St. Helens is actually about an hour from here. And maybe a little less. But it's not, volcanoes aren't something that worry me. It's not going to shoot magma, 50 miles down here. It happened in 80, and I lived, much farther south, like 20 miles. And yeah, our whole backyard was covered with ash, and it came and it went. The same thing that just happened with this forest fire. Everything out here was just covered with ash, all the cars, a light dusting, but giving people breathing problems and whatnot. And that was all started by one kid with a firework. And when a fire's started by somebody, you can blame a person, and you make you think, why did they do that? But it doesn't matter. It happened. It would have happened. Lightning strikes happen. But when it's a big storm, it's a completely different story. There's really nobody to blame. So the blame goes to God. The blame goes to HAARP. It goes to the government, chemtrails, conspiracies, whatever it might be. I guess what I'm saying is that it's best that we just forget blame and start working together, and realizing that when the shit really hits the fan, and when disasters really start to increase with major frequency and we're all affected, well, of course, I said this 20 years ago. This is exactly the kind of thing I was talking about to just random people who would listen. I was kind of a conspiracy guy, and I was like, did you know that, they can declare martial law, and there's FEMA camps, and all these things that I learned, and then I realized none of it matters. There's always something coming around the corner that people want to blame the government or the Illuminati or the reptilians for. Even if it's true, none of it matters, because there's no course of action that will change that. If there really are aliens in charge of everything, there's nothing you can do to change that. If there's really a God or really a devil, I guess the only thing that a human being can do is prepare your mind by being aware and by no fear, no fear. I mean, the worst that can happen is you die, okay? And the best that can happen is that you develop a community and you're able to help people out and help them through hard times. So I'll leave with the notion that if you have the ability to help, I'm far away from being able to help anyone down in the flood zones, but if I was down there, I'd take my damn canoe out and try to rescue people. Of course I would. Anything I could do. The forest fires here, I wanted to go up there and check that out. They're saying clear, stay out of the area. People aren't in danger at this point, so just stay clear, let the rescuers do their jobs, and that's great. But people want to help, is my point. But making donations, the last thing I wanted to talk about here, donating to the Red Cross may not be a very good idea. Donating to some of these missions is not a good idea. There are some great, you'll have to do the research, but if you're planning on giving money to flood victims or to hurricane victims, just be aware that the Red Cross uses a lot of their money on administration, and there's a huge controversy about how their money is being spent and was spent in Haiti. I think, half a trillion dollars or $500 million. I don't know how much it was. It was a huge amount of money that just kind of wasn't accounted for. None of the things that, were rebuilt, that claimed to be rebuilt, and some of the top officials get paid too much. The problem is that people want to give to charity. So a lot of charities spring up out of these things. And so if you can help and you're financially able to help, there are direct relief efforts that are actually in the field. But I don't know who they are. You'll have to talk to others. It's rough times right now. Things are strange for a lot of people. That's just going to get worse. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that, but don't obsess about it. I don't wake up each morning and say, oh, the world's ending. I wake up each morning and say, okay, what happened? Okay, now how do I go about my day? So that's all I got for today. I just wanted to kind of put out my thoughts to those who are involved in these storms and say, man, I can't imagine how it would be trying to flee a place like Florida. I visited there a couple times on vacation and said, man, I would never want to live here. I'd be so afraid of a storm, But everybody's got to live somewhere, right? So I'll talk to y'all later.